You're listening to Everything Out There with your host, Steve Stockton.
Hello, friends. Hello, once again, and welcome to Everything Out There on the Clyde Lewis Ground Zero Radio Network. I'm your host, Steve Stockton. Welcome in. Tonight, joining me on the phone, a friend of mine for many years. You might know her from her work on Caravan of Lore or some of the scripts she wrote and narrated for me over on my 13 Past Midnight YouTube channel. Or you might know her from her work with Seth Breedlove's Smalltown Monsters. And she's also a classics professor at Kent State University. Welcome, Heather Moser. Heather, come on in.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you here on the phone with us tonight. So what's going on in your world? I haven't seen you in probably been over a year. You and
Uh,
Seth showed up in New Mexico in the Four Corners area and filmed me for a documentary we're working on. What's happened since that transpired?
yeah, we showed up and we kidnapped you for a little bit so that you could tell us some stories. Well, let's see. That does seem like a long time ago. We have been filming other films, filming other movies, and the one that you're in, American Werewolves 2, which it should have been out by now, but then we had an issue with our distributor, so it's kind of been put on the back burner. It should be coming out though very soon. I don't think I'm allowed to say yet, but we have an official date now, so
Okay.
it'll be within the month.
Well,
Um,
I'm looking forward to that. I've been expecting my copy in the mail just any time. I'm anxious to see how it turned out, but it was great meeting Seth and the crew and getting to meet you in person finally.
yes, it was great to finally meet you. Um, let's see, we went to British Columbia and we filmed there for On the Trail of Bigfoot, the origin. So we've done that. Right now we're in the midst of, and this is about the only thing that has my brain occupied at the moment. We're in the midst of our Kickstarter, and that takes up all of February for us. Um, so that's the biggest thing right now, trying to get our Kickstarter funded as much as possible, and that'll help get us through the year.
Yeah, and I saw the notification on Facebook. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for the Kickstarter there, and everybody go pledge your support to that. It's a great franchise they've got going there. How many are they up to now with the Small Town Monsters series?
Like how many movies you mean? Oh
Yes.
my goodness. Well, I don't know. It's got to be close to 20 at this point, if not more. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's a lot.
Yeah, I know
It's a lot.
it's out there, and then there's a great canon of work there. I've only seen a few of them, but they're all just incredible movies, and really looking forward to see the one that I'm in. Now, is
Of
that going to be
course.
premiering like at some film festivals and things like that, or some conferences, paranormal conferences, or are you allowed to say?
So American Werewolves 2 did actually premiere last fall in Kentucky to an audience, and it was very well received. But as of right now, it's not scheduled for any premieres now.
Okay, that's still good to hear, though. At least it's out there, and it
Oh
did
yeah.
get good reception, and
Oh
hopefully
yeah.
nobody laughed at my part too hard.
Absolutely not. And our Kickstarter backers, they've had access to it. So, and it's gotten good reviews from them as well. So that's the other bonus of Kickstarter backing is that you get access to our films. Even if we have issues with the distributor,
Yeah.
you get access to the films early. So,
Yeah, and I've worked some in film and getting that coverage right away to see how it plays, that's just invaluable.
hmm
You can
yeah,
kinda think of those
exactly.
people as your test audience, if you will.
Yep, definitely.
So, let's just start at the beginning here. Like I said, you wrote and narrated some things for me over
hmm
on my 13 Past Midnight channel, which is still on hiatus. I'm gonna be bringing it back, but, I'm back on, Missing Persons and Mysteries. I now own that channel, so that's getting a
Yes.
lot of my time and attention. Just under 275,000 subscribers over there. And then in the
Nice.
interim, I started Among the Missing, and I've gotten, I think, 104K, 105K over there now. So I've been a busy guy, just published my 20th book this last year, if you count the one that Cisco and I co-wrote, and had a couple other co-writers in there on some of these recent ones. But yeah, no moss growing under this Rolling Stone. So,
And that's good. That's good.
well, thank you. But what garnered your interest in the paranormal? Did it start like so many of us in early childhood, or were you a late bloomer when it came to all things dark and scary, or what's your personal story?
Oh, it definitely started whenever I was young. It's very, very much tied to what was on TV at a very young age. Unsolved Mysteries was something that was on the TV every week, and that garnered my attention, almost like a morbid curiosity to a certain extent. I remember very vividly an episode about the Yeti and being afraid of the Yeti as a result of that. Also, spontaneous human combustion was one of the episodes, and I had this unrealistic fear that that was going to be how I'd meet my demise at some point in my life.
Oh yeah, that one always scared me too. I remember reading about that when I was a kid, probably in the one of those Reader's Digest Tales of the Paranormal books, or maybe even the Time Life Library. Had the picture of the lady there that I think her leg was all that was left,
Uh huh.
and a
Oh
burn
yeah.
mark on the chair, and that used to scare the daylights out of me. I'm like, what if I spontaneously combust? And then that
Right.
and
Exactly.
quicksand. Now I'm a little bit older than you are, maybe a lot older than you are, but if you watch TV in the late '60s and the early '70s, particularly westerns, quicksand was a thing. It got a lot of people, and almost got some of my heroes, Daniel Boone and his son Israel and Davy Crockett and Gunsmoke. People were always getting in quicksand. But yeah, SHC, spontaneous human combustion, Bigfoot. I used to actually go out looking for Bigfoot when I was a kid. I don't know what I would have done if I'd found one, but
That's a great question. What would you?
yeah. And I've wondered about that. These people that go out looking for it and they play the mating calls and stuff. Well, what if that works? And all of a sudden, an amorous Bigfoot comes charging out of the woods. Do you run? Do you stay and take one for the team, or what would happen in that situation? I've often wondered about that.
Yeah, things to think about for sure. Yeah, that another thing when you mentioned quicksand, I do remember also being extremely afraid of the Bermuda Triangle, even though I have yet to go over the Bermuda Triangle. I was positive that if I did, I would disappear. That was another thing that was very common when I was younger.
Yeah, Charles Burlett's book about that was out in that era anyway, and yeah, that one frightened me. I've yet to fly over it as well. I've been in the edge of it, but that's about as close as I want to get. But in some of my research and things that I've done, there are a lot of triangles out there. They are all over the place.
Oh yeah.
Here in New England, where I'm at, you've got the Bennington Triangle. Then
Mm.
you've got the Nevada Triangle. There's an Alaskan Triangle. There's
Yeah.
one in Northern California. What is it
Mhm.
with triangles? Maybe you can enlighten us from your work as a professor there, and look back into history or maybe even prehistory. Is there something mystical about the triangle?
Well, it's one of the strongest shapes, right? We've got pyramids, and we're always fascinated by those and how they were even built. But with these triangle areas, it seems to be that you've got the a conglomeration of sightings in one area, and I think just human nature, we're like, okay, where are the outer limits of this? Let's make 3 points, and oh, it's a triangle. It also sounds a lot better than like the Bridgewater rhombus or
Yeah,
something.
or the Alaskan dodecahedron or something like that. But yeah,
Right. So
there's just something about those being able to find 3 points, and I know it's always easy to connect the dots in reverse, but it does appear to be within a boundary. And again, there is
sure.
a mysticism with the triangle, from a mathematical perspective and then from an alchemical and metaphysical perspective.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of those pesky triangles out there, and I hope I don't get caught in any of them.
Well, and that's the one of the things over at Small Town Monsters that we've started in the last at this point it's been a couple years now. We started a publishing company, and one of our early books was The Texas Dogman Triangle by Aaron Deese, and that the whole idea of the Dogman Triangle came about after Aaron had accumulated all of these stories through historical and modern day times and realized, oh wait, they're pretty concentrated in an area, and lo and behold, there's 3 points. Let's make that the Texas Dogman Triangle.
Now, see, I
So
find that fascinating. I haven't heard anything about this. I'll definitely have to read that book. Can you elaborate on that a little bit without giving too much of the book away?
so the Texas Dogman Triangle, the points are roughly around Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston. So it's a pretty decent size triangle, but then again, Texas is massive, so it really isn't that big on the general scale of things. Um, but yeah, there are stories back from even the 1800s of these creatures that are bipedal, canine, uh, half human, half canine creatures that have been aggressive. They're very rarely, I mean, you just don't hear stories necessarily about them being something that you want to encounter. They're not, I don't know, they don't seem as friendly as maybe your local Bigfoot. um, but there's sightings that are accumulated in that area between those 3 points that are historical and modern day. And even after Aaron put the book out, which I'm sure you can attest to this from being an author as well, once you get the book out there, then you get more sightings. You get more people coming in that have read the book and they're like, actually, I live in that area as well, and I had an encounter. So his database of sightings has grown since the book has come out as well, just kind of adding to, yes, this is a definitive area where there seems to be a concentration of dogman sightings.
Yeah, and that's been my experience too. People read the book and then they want to add something to it. Every single one of my books, and a couple of them have been updated to new editions, but like Strange Things in the Woods, that's actually 2 volumes combined. That was originally Strange Things in the Woods and More Strange Things in the Wood. My publisher combined them, but I've got enough for a second volume of those, and that's just things in the woods. I mean, there's strange things in the water, strange things in the sky, strange things on the farm, strange things in the city. It's just
Right.
strange is a relative term there, but people seem to be more aware of it. I don't know, maybe it's just me since I've published those books and gone on a lot of shows and have my own shows and stuff now. But there seems to be just a higher interest in it. Um, there was a lot in the 70s, a particular 1973. That was a big UFO year. There was a huge UFO flap in 73. And even my family jumped on that bandwagon. My brother lived on the highest point around where we lived. And
Mhm.
a lot of like a Friday night or Saturday night, we would go over there, get lawn chairs, sit out in his yard and watch the skies. And we saw anomalous stuff, stuff that made no sense, stuff that wasn't airplanes or jets or anything like that. But then it all just kind of died down. Those things tend to come in waves like that, flaps they call them. And I think that's
Mhm.
true of anything cryptid or paranormal. There seems to be certain times when it's more active or more prevalent. And I hear from people now that study that side of it that the veil is thin, and that's why I mean it's thin around a certain time of year in the pagan and Celtic beliefs. But now I've heard people say that it's getting thinner all the time, year round, and that's why all this is ramping up. You know, maybe that's so, or maybe it's just with the advent of the internet and being able to communicate worldwide with somebody. I mean, you're sitting in Ohio, I'm sitting in New England, but we're talking like we're right here next to each other. Um,
Mhm.
I think that just it has indeed made the world a smaller place, and
Oh
more
yeah.
people are willing to share. Because back, like when the Strange Things in the Woods, a lot of those stories were from friends of my family and people that my parents knew and things like that. 99% of the people in that book have passed on now, and, they
Mhm.
were reticent to tell those stories, but till you kinda go on. I mean, sometimes it was like you had to get a log chain and drag it out of them. And the one old gentleman, Otto Darrow, he's been passed for several years, but he would tell me things when he found out I wasn't gonna laugh at him or make fun of him that he hadn't even shared with his wife. She'd be sitting there while we were talking, she's like, "You never told me that," and he'd, have some glib response, "Well, you never asked," or something like that. But I think people are more open to talking about it now. And has that been your experience with the small town monsters? Is it easier the longer you do it? Is it easier to find witnesses to come forward and talk about what they see or in some cases didn't see?
Yeah, I think it definitely has helped that I mean, Smalltown Monsters has been around since Minerva Monster came out in 2015. And just the fact that we've been around for a while and people can actually look at our body of work and see that we're not going to make fun of them has been a boon for us as far as getting people to feel comfortable talking to us. As a researcher for small town monsters, what I've noticed is there are certain cryptids where it's a lot easier to get people to talk because it is more accepted. Bigfoot, it's a lot easier to get people to come forward and tell you that they had an encounter with Bigfoot because it just seems to be more socially accepted right now. Dogman is a little iffy, but when you get into other things like sometimes UFOs can be a little trickier, although that is starting to shift as well with everything that's happening in our culture on the news. You know, the government's coming forward and saying, yes, there's there's been UFOs or UAPs rather. Um, that's making it a little easier. But I have stories from people that had odd encounters of things that don't necessarily fall into the pop culture look at the strange, if that makes sense, and they're more reticent to come forward with anything. So, and then as far as the movies that we've done, it was difficult to get people to American Werewolves 2 that you're in. That's titled The Skinwalkers. It was very difficult to get people to come forward and talk about any type of skinwalker encounter, um, which is not surprising. But I don't think that that stigma is necessarily going away, even if we have shows out there like Skinwalker Ranch. Um, that is just a cultural thing that isn't going to change.
Yeah, I agree. And just because they put it on TV and put it where it can be consumed by a mass audience, I think that raises the awareness and gets more people interested in it. People, I spoke to a guy not too long ago that he I think he's finding Bigfoot or something like that, that he'd caught an episode of and had no interest in it prior to that. And then suddenly he's hooked and devouring everything he can find about the
Mhm.
subject, reading books, watching other shows, actually going out in the field and doing some research. So I think sometimes it's just that little spark, that je ne sais quoi, if you will, that excites these people. Like, hey, I didn't know this was out here, and there's all this work and media that you can consume. And I don't know if people like that will stay in it, but at least it's nice to have an interest in it for a while, even if you go on
Yeah.
to something else. I mean, on my personal taste and interest, even in the paranormal change. While I was big into UFOs as a child, I kind of grew out of that, went more into Bigfoot, and then from that into other cryptids, and that's kind of what got me into the missing people stuff too. And now I'm kind
Mhm.
of circled back around and coming another interest in UFOs, but I like the classic cases. I've got a new YouTube channel. It's not very big yet. It's only about 3,500 subscribers, called From Beyond. And we're looking at some of the classic UFO cases. Recently, first episode, we covered the Betty and Barney Hill alleged abduction from here in New England. The
Mhm.
week prior to that, we looked at Rendlesham Forest, which has been called the UK's Roswell. And there's some good stuff out there back during that era, before all the abduction tomfoolery, and not discounting anybody's beliefs or theories or anything there. I spoke at a UFO conference and met a lot of abductees that they believe what they say, and that gives me, the belief in their testimony, I think. But I like it
Yeah.
when it was, everybody that was men from Mars or moon men or uh, little green men in their flying saucers and things before it got beyond that. And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
you mentioned UFO or UAP. What do you think the reason is for the name change this far into the game? Why would they suddenly just start calling it a UAP when we've been used to UFOs for decades?
Um, well, that is a great question. I'm not sure, other than they're trying to make a broader term, perhaps, to cover more things. Maybe UFOs just seemed outdated for them, or maybe we're actually behind the times and they don't actually use that anymore. Maybe they're just throwing us a bone and saying,
Mm.
yeah, we called it UAPs while you guys are busy calling it UFOs.
Could be that,
Now
but
we have another term.
yeah, and I had a commenter on one of my live streams, like this week on, From Beyond. He said, "It's to make it harder to search for things in a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act." You know, I hadn't
Oh,
even thought about that.
I hadn't either.
If they're calling it a UAP now, but you're looking for UFO information, people that just come along and get into it now won't maybe not even realize that UFO was the preferred
Right.
nomenclature before it went to UAP. So it could be a little
That's a good
bit of
point.
classic mixed direction there.
Yeah. I would not put it past anybody.
And full disclosure, do you think that it's coming, or do you think we'll ever find out for sure, or is it just too immersed, too hidden from view that to ever be revealed? Because that would destroy a lot of paradigms, if you will, if we did get full
True.
disclosure in the way that people expect. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that that is definitely a concern that it would cause issues, especially in the religious community. But um, I feel like at some point it'll just be. I think on down the line, not anytime, probably not in my lifetime, but I think that it'll be something that they can't deny anymore, and we will all know. We may not know the extent of anything, or um, but I don't think that we're going to be able to live forever with this, with blinders on, that there's nothing else in the universe except us. So I think it'll come out eventually. I think it's kind of it'll probably be a situation where the government's hand is forced, so to speak. Um, that would be my guess.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I don't know at this point what it would take to convince everybody. I mean, there's been people that have been with
There's
people that
that,
have had these firsthand experiences, and they didn't believe what they saw.
right?
So again, I don't know if
Well,
one landed on the White House lawn and came out and shook hands with people, but then people are going to say, "Oh, that's AI generated. It's CGI. It's a deep fake." Or
mhm.
Project Bluebeam. Are you familiar with that?
I am not.
It's
Blue
supposedly,
beam? No.
Project Bluebeam, one word. It's a type of, I don't know if it's an apparatus or how it works, but it's a militarized thing where they can project a hologram that you can't tell the difference from the real thing. And according
Oh,
to which conspiracy theory you subscribe to, they can beam it straight into your head. It doesn't even have to be a physical manifestation. They can cause you to see it in your brain, I guess. I'm not sure all the ins and
wow.
outs of it, but used to they say I believe what was it, a quarter of what you read and half of what you see or something like. Now we can't believe anything that we see or hear with
Yeah,
all the and AI. I know a lot of people are scared of it, and it can cause some problems and things. But I see it as a tool. It can be beneficial. It's like anything like that. Like when my dad was small, people were scared of electricity. He said he's
right.
heard preachers in the pulpit talk about electricity. You're fooling with something you shouldn't fool with, and it's going to destroy the world. And but yet it
Mhm.
didn't, and it changed everything. And I heard the same about nuclear power and things like that. And then that came to what's next. And uh,
Right.
somebody's going to be afraid of everything, and there are people that are averse to any kind of change, and I get that. I don't like especially swift and sudden change, but I'm open to new ideas. But what do you think about CERN and what's going on over there? Do you think they're tampering with something they shouldn't, oughta, as the saying goes, or what's your belief on that? Is it changing things, uh, like the Mandela effect? I've heard people attribute that to CERN. What's your thoughts on that?
That's funny. I didn't realize that people were attributing that to CERN. No, I don't think that they're messing with something that they shouldn't mess with, over at CERN. There's I don't know. This also comes from more of a personal perspective as well, because there was someone that went to my school that worked over at CERN for a while. And like I knew him, and he was super nice and kind, and I would like to think that he would have the sense to not mess with something that he shouldn't mess with. And that this is absolutely all in the name of science and furthering our understanding of the universe. So, um, That would be my thought on it. I don't How
But
horrible if
I'll
they
play
started to mess with something
yeah,
and then it
I'll play
ruined
devil's
everything.
advocate here, though. What if it's compartmentalized and people that are good and just are
That's
working
true.
on this project and don't exactly know what they're working on? Now, I draw from personal experience. Both my parents were a part of the Manhattan Project, and they
Mhm.
had an idea of what they were working on, the whole of it. But still, you had this person doing this and that person doing that, and the
Right.
people up above who were coordinating everything, they knew what they were doing. That's why part of it was in Oak Ridge and part of it was in Los Alamos. They wanted to keep those fissionable materials separate until they got
Mhm.
ready to arm everything. But there was a lot of people. There was Clinton Engineer Works prior to ORNL and the AEC and other uh, agencies that worked out there. But again, they knew they were doing something for the greater good,
Right.
but they didn't know exactly what they're doing. So if that many people, and
Yeah.
Oak Ridge at that time didn't even exist. It wasn't on any maps. It was a city behind a fence, and you had guard shacks at every entrance into town, and you had to show a badge or you didn't get in there. So, but nobody talked. I mean, it was again part of the war effort, and
Mhm.
your silence was necessary, and people got called on that. I've heard about people that attended dances inside the fence and maybe whispered to their date about something they were working on, and then it was found out that they had again talked a little more than they should have, and they were
Sure.
chided for that, if not fired, or you could be arrested. My dad, he talked about some of the documents and things that he had signed even far into retirement. He said there were certain things that are classified and that are still classified that he wouldn't be able to talk about ever, lest he, could lose his pension and his insurance and all that stuff. So those people,
Mhm.
but again, they understood they were doing it for the greater good. But
Sure.
people can
Or at
keep a
least that's what they
secret.
were told.
Yeah,
That's
that's what they were told.
Yeah.
And I know it's just astounding. And then another conspiracy theory that gave me particular insight into was Project Paperclip. And I've heard people debunk that and say, "Oh, that didn't happen. It doesn't exist." But yet, my dad, who was a scientist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, he worked right alongside some of those German scientists that were brought over after the war. And
Mhm.
personal story, I went to school, elementary school, with a kid who was from Germany, and I went home with him after school one day, and his dad was a scientist out there as well. Spoke fluent German. Now, the kid my age spoke English. His dad had a heavy accent, but we were down in the basement. They had like a rec room. That was the big thing to have downstairs in the 70s, was a family room or a rec room. And he's like, "Come here, I want to show you something." And I'm like, "Okay." And he pushes on the paneled wall back there, and it swings open. And I thought, okay, he's going to show me a bomb shelter. A lot of houses built after the war had a bomb shelter in them because of the Cold War and all that going on.
Right.
And I thought, okay, he's going to show me his bomb shelter. We didn't have one, but I knew other kids that had a bomb shelter in their basement. So he opens it up and he flicks on the light. And here is the biggest display of German war memorabilia that I have ever seen before or since. And
Whoa.
in one, I don't know if it was glass or plexiglass case, there was a uniform, a very high-ranking uniform. And I said, "Wow, your dad really loves his war memorabilia." And he said, "Steve, you don't understand." He said that was his uniform. So he had
Oh my
this little
gosh.
shrine to the fatherland in his basement, yet he was out working at British National
Wow.
Laboratory right alongside my dad. So that Project Paperclip is not a myth. So
That is
again, you never
wild.
know. There's a lot of people that keep a lot of secrets out there.
Yeah. The compartmentalizing thing, I mean, I understand it, but it's scary to think that way, to think about all the things that people may be working on and not knowing the full extent of it, and then what the actual purpose is behind it on a larger scale.
And then you have places like Area 51, where there's things going on that, again, everybody there doesn't know what they're working on. But then you have a whistleblower like Bob Lazar. What do you think of his testimony? Do you think that he's on the up and up, or has he just found a way to opportunize all this?
I was actually just watching Bob Lazar last night. Watching his interview with oh, what is that? Oh, Joe Rogan.
Mhm.
And I would say that if he's not being truthful, he's come up with a lot of details that make it extremely believable.
Yeah.
Um like I this is just first glance at these things. I did not detect him lying about anything from that interview anyway. Um because there were just too many, like I said, too many nuances that he had in there. That he's either a fantastic storyteller or a great liar, or he's telling the truth.
Yeah. That was my takeaway from that too. He believes what he's saying, or seems to.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
I can say that of a lot of, in the UFO culture things. I've heard, Travis Walton speak,
Mhm.
and, saw him at a conference and listened to him speak. He believes what he says. He believes that that's what's happened to either that or he's the greatest actor that we've ever seen or the most accomplished liar ever. And there's a
Right.
lot of people like that. Even Whitley Strieber, I've heard him speak before. I don't think he does the conferences anymore. At least he doesn't do them in Las Vegas because the casinos don't enforce a no smoking policy, or they didn't when I was there. But, I believe that he believes what he saw. Yeah, he made a fortune off books and movies and things, but I think he is telling the truth as he knows it about those
Right.
experiences he has with starting with communion and beyond.
Mhm. I think that's a good way to put it. Uh that they it's the truth as they believe it.
Yeah, and that's like with my own experiences. I've had people try to debunk stuff that I've seen. Like, "Oh, you didn't see that," or "That didn't happen," or "How could you remember it in that much detail?" Well, that's just the way my brain operates. I can remember things just in infinite detail. I've got a near photographic memory. So that's
Right.
one way I can remember all these details. Plus, when you have one of those encounters or experiences, it just I don't know, it crystallizes in the mind. I can go back to any of my several, especially the really, really scary ones and things, and I can remember every little detail of everything around me, what I had for breakfast that day, what was going on, what I did afterwards. I don't know how I could not remember all that, and just the fact to me that I can recall it in that great a detail just shows to me that that's it's real. In my mind, I was there. I know what happened. I know what I saw or didn't see or felt or heard, and nobody's ever gonna convince me otherwise.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you were there. You had the experience.
Yeah,
Your
so I
memory says you
personally,
did.
I don't care if anybody believes it or not, like Ripley's Believe It or Not, this is Stockton's Believe It or Don't. I don't care. That might be a name for a podcast, um,
I like
Believe It
it.
or Don't. Um, but again, I'm not here to win any friends or influence any people. I'm just sharing what's happened to me and hopefully make it a little easier for other people to share what's happened with them. And that was one thing I wanted to ask you. With Small Town Monsters, have you ever had a showing of those like in a retirement home or an old folks home or anything like that?
No, but
Well, that's
I'm
that's one of the
intrigued.
things I do with my books. I like to go and do a reading. And,
Okay.
especially with Strange Things in the Woods or even My Strange World, and a lot of times it'll just be like somebody like, "Ah, what's this crap? There's no bingo tonight," and they'll sit there and they'll do their knitting or their crochet or whatever, and then they just get up and leave. But usually, there'll be a couple people hang around after the reading is over, and I know what's coming up, and usually it'll be an older gentleman, and he'll sidle up to me and say, "That story you had about the barn," he said, "Let me tell you what happened to you what happened sorry, let me tell you what happened to me when I was a kid." And then the story just comes out, and maybe, this guy's been sitting on it for decades, and yet by hearing me tell my stories or tell other people's stories in the case of Strange Things in the Woods, it frees him up. And otherwise, that story might not have ever seen the light of day. Maybe he didn't tell it to anybody. He could have taken it to the grave with him. And that's a part of the commission that I'm doing here. I'm getting these stories out there so that they'll live on longer than the people that told them, like in Strange Things in the Woods, or longer than me. I'm hoping, I'm building a legacy here. And I've
Mhm.
encouraged other people to write. Cisco Murdoch, Mark Anthony Wyatt. There's a lot of stuff here that, I've kind of been like a Johnny Appleseed to some of this, but I wonder what kind of response you would get if you showed those in that type of setting if it would scare the
Yeah.
pants off those old people, or if there would be some that would stick around and share their stories. You might want to give that a thought. Mention that to
Yeah.
Seth and see what he thinks.
Yeah, that would be really interesting, especially because we are so close to where, like Minerva Monster. I mean, I live in Minerva, so we're not far at all from where that happened.
Oh,
So to show that and then see what their reaction would be,
yeah, and you could do
that
it,
would be
in the
something.
library. You could do it in schools. That's another thing. Another undermined segment. Like I said, old people or senior citizens are one of our greatest wealths as far as folklore and stories and things. But
Mhm.
another audience that I've found is the teenagers. I go to a skateboard park or anywhere where teenagers congregate and say, "Hey, if you were going out on a date and you wanted to go parking someplace spooky, where's the Crybaby Bridge? Where's the White Lady Walk or the Lady in White or whatever?" And
Right.
those they know all those places too. I did when I was a kid, and
Right, that's true.
the adults didn't pass it around like kids did, and I think that's the way a lot of these urban legends and uh, in the South, particularly in the Appalachians, there's a Crybaby Bridge in every little community.
Yes,
And
there
I don't
is.
know if it's like a version of the telephone game where somebody heard it and then just retold it, but they added in a location that their audience would know, or if there's
Mhm.
really, I mean, Texas, there's a Crybaby Bridge there. And then the same with the tunnel where there it's a railroad track, I think, where the kids put their hands on the car and push you over.
Oh, right, yes, yeah.
There's a railroad tunnel in, the Kingsport, Tennessee, that's like that, Sensabaugh Tunnel. There's just the same stories in different locations, so it makes me think somewhere, sometime that really happened and it just got passed around. Another
Mhm.
example, my mom's from East Tennessee. She grew up, or was born in the Cades Cove area of the Smokies like my grandmother, and then my dad's from Middle Tennessee over on the Cumberland Plateau. But a lot of the stories that she would tell that she heard as a child, he had heard them as a child as well, even though they were 6 years apart, but in a local setting, hours apart by car. So again, and this was
Right.
before the days of, and I guess they could have heard it on the radio or something, but this was stories that they told around the wood stove in the wintertime or in front of the
Mhm.
fireplace. But,
Yeah.
to me, that's fascinating, the way these stories get passed around and they change. It's like a version of telephone games. Did you ever play that when you were in school?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Things are vastly different sometimes by the by the end of the game.
Yeah, well, you mentioned being there in or near Minerva. Now,
Mhm.
there's something about, and you can agree or choose to disagree with me here. There's something about Ohio in general that has a strangeness to it. That there's little pockets of weirdness there, and I mean that in the kindest and best possible way. Uh,
That's good.
but
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the brothers from the Believe All podcast, Chris,
Mhm.
Jeremy, and John. They're out of Ohio, and
Mm.
they are among my 3 favorite Ohioans, and they've investigated a lot of stuff there and realized that there's just something strange there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think we've got something here between the we're in the foothills of the Appalachians, and then we've got the rivers all around here. I think when you get the confluence of all of those things together, plus the history, just the history in the area, the tribes that were once here, the mound builders that were here. Yeah, we've got a lot going on in this area, that's for sure.
Yeah, and then, of course, you have, stuff around the West Virginia area and the Kentucky areas that goes over into Ohio, the
Mhm.
Mothman, Point
Oh,
Pleasant
yeah.
things, and then, um, how that all connects. But, yeah, when I was on their show, they interviewed me. That's one of my favorite interviews that I've ever done, if not the favorite. I said to them that, I was sharing some of my Ohio experiences as a child, and I said, "Any state that gave us, Dean Martin, Larry Flint, and the Cramps is a great state," and they laughed at that. They "We've had astronauts and presidents and stuff," but
Yep,
excuse me, had to
exactly.
clear my throat. But again, that's just divergent things that I could think of that make it strange. It's not your normal state, if there is a normal, but there's an extra weirdness there that I can appreciate, and sounds like you can too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Now, Minerva Monster, you mentioned that. For those of listening that might not have heard of that, can you give us a little background on what the Minerva Monster is?
Yeah, so it's a Bigfoot creature a Bigfoot creature that was seen in 1978 in Minerva, Ohio. Um, and he made his appearance with and why did their name just escape my brain? Um, oh, for goodness sakes. He made his appearance in Minerva with a family, and they called the local sheriff's department. And of course, people came out and looked, and pretty soon it got in the newspapers. And then, without fail, people were showing up from all over the place to try to hunt this monster. Um, and yeah, that was, I mean, the family faced a decent amount of ridicule. And it wasn't until we had the documentary come out that some of them actually got a little more, let's see, how do you say, like a little more acknowledgement, I guess. Things were put to peace a little bit better when the documentary came out. Like, oh, okay. I guess maybe that did happen. And you guys weren't just making stuff up at the time, which why anybody would make that up, I don't know. Why anybody would want that kind of attention, especially then. But that was what happened. It was in the 70s, and there were a rash of sightings. So it was the Caton family. That's right. The Caton family. I knew it'd come to me eventually.
Yeah. And I enjoy those stories like that, kind of a one-off. I mean, I don't know necessarily
Mhm.
that that is or not, but the
Yeah.
things where it just happened over a short period of time and maybe a
Yep.
handful of people, well, like here in New England and Massachusetts, you have the Dover Demon, which was
Yes.
basically spotted over 2 nights in, I
Mhm.
think it was 1977, 78. And then it was just gone and nobody ever saw anything again. Although now looking back, there's people that claim that something similar to that had been seen before and since, but the story that I'm familiar with, it just
Right.
happened, and I love that sort of thing. I love to go to those places. I'm more of a legend tripper than I am an
Mhm.
investigator. I like to just go and, if you will, bask in the ambiance and say, I'm in Dover. This is where this happened, and I have an interesting story about that back in the '80s. Um, I'd gone to visit a friend that was going to NYU, and one weekend they said, "Hey, we're going to go to this house party. Go with us." And it was in Massachusetts. It was a good drive, and ended up we were in Dover. We went to these people's house out in the suburbs, and they're like, "So, Steve, what do you think of Dover?" And I'm like, "Well, it's different. I'm Tennessean and was kind of lost ball in high winds in New York, and even more so at that time in New England." And I said,
Mhm.
"Oh, I think it's great." I said, "I've heard about the Dover Demon." They're like, "The Dover Demon," and they start yelling for this guy. They're like, "Bill, Bill, come here, come here!" And this guy, and there was two guys named Bill, one William, and the other was named Bill. I don't remember which one exactly that I met, but he was at this house party in Dover, and he came out, and he seemed kind of embarrassed or kind of humbled because his friends were making a big deal of it. But I spoke with one of the witnesses about a year or two after it happened, and again, he believed what he saw,
Sure.
and I believe it was the one that drew the initial pictures of it and stuff. Again, there was a Bill and a William that were eyewitnesses, but
Yeah.
don't know, can't, lost in the midst of time. I was in college at the time, and a lot of that is in a haze, uh,
I understand.
some
Yeah,
some
that
40 years after the fact.
if you were to come to Minerva now, and you would go past the Caton's house, they still live in the same house. They've embraced it now. They have a Bigfoot statue outside of their home. Um, yeah, they'll talk to you about it now.
And I talked about that. It was on this show, or I do a blog called Around the Campfire. I might have talked about it over there. How a lot of times communities have learned to embrace these cryptids or these strange occurrences, and
Yeah.
they turn it into something that's good for the local economy. They sell souvenirs. They have a festival, and they get
Yeah.
people talking about it. Like, they have the Mothman Festival, and then
Right.
the Flatwoods Monster. That's a big deal. And I think
Mhm.
what better way to share this than to make it a community-wide thing. And yeah, it's kind of kitschy with the souvenirs and some of that, but it's fun and it gets an interest up. I mean, kids will always remember, when I was a kid, they took me to the Mothman Festival, and we saw this and we saw that. And I
Yeah.
think that's a great way to continue interest in all things weird and spooky.
Oh, I agree. I think it's one of the smartest things that a community could do, right, especially right now. It seems that pop culture is wanting more of these stories. We're wanting to hear about more monsters, and these festivals are just they're doing well. So you're not only preserving the story, you're helping, like you said, helping the local economy. I don't know what a town like Point Pleasant would be like without the Mothman Festival. Um,
It'd just be
it's a river
basically
town,
it'd be a new age mill town without the mill. The way I
right?
see it.
Yeah, so that's one of the best things that they could have done for their town was to have that Mothman Festival and have the museum and really embrace it and not shun it so much. Now there are places where we've been uh Louisiana, Missouri, I believe is the name of the town where Momo was, the which
Yeah.
was another Bigfoot creature in the 70s,
Mhm.
1972, I believe. They embraced the story of Momo, the whole craze of it early on after the initial sightings, but then have shunned it. So when Small Town Monsters went over to do the Momo documentary, they were actually told by some locals, you might as well just leave because you're not wanted here. But that's another river town that I think would greatly benefit if they were to embrace Momo and start to have a festival or something. Um, Draw people in, bring tourists in. There is something in cryptid tourism, you know, that and
Yeah.
scare tourism, good ways to bring in money to the local economy and then to keep the story alive as well.
Yeah. And especially with some of the places now that they're doing, excuse me, like the overnight ghost hunts and things. Those things would have been
Oh
demolished or
my
just left
goodness.
to collapse back into the earth like Brushy
Sure.
Mountain Penitentiary in Petros, Tennessee. Now
Mhm.
you can go, and they've getting some wonderful EVPs and experiences and stories out of there. Um, some of the
Yeah.
true crime locations, the Villisca Axe Murder House,
Mhm.
the Lizzie Borden house. That's a bed and breakfast now. It's just, and
Yep.
it's kind of morbid, but I think just that's one of our characteristics as humans. We have an innate curiosity about the darker side of things, and I'm
Yeah.
thankful for that. It's provided me the opportunity to go to a lot of places and talk to a lot of people and in front of a lot of people and write a lot of books and things.
Mhm.
But yeah, embrace the strange.
Yeah, exactly. And having these places open to the public allows for the folklore to continue, right? We get to actually be a part of it, morphing and changing, like in real time. Something
Yeah,
like the Lizzie Borden house, or like you mentioned, Brushy Mountain. When we're now, it's focused on ghost hunting and the paranormal. Now that gets to take on a whole other chapter in the story of those areas, and that's pretty awesome. Um, We have a place not far from here, Mansfield Reformatory, which is where
yeah.
Shawshank Redemption was filmed.
I heard a
Uh,
lot about it. Have you been there?
oh, oh, I've been there multiple times,
Well,
and
would you share with our audience a little bit of your experiences there? I've only seen it on TV, but wow.
sure, sure, yeah, it's a gorgeous piece of architecture. It just looks like a castle when you drive up to it. It's one of my favorite buildings, but the Mansfield Reformatory is where I had probably the most terrifying encounter that I've had to that I've witnessed, and it's weird to say terrifying because I wasn't, it's not like a Bigfoot running out of the woods, and trying to eat you or something. I didn't think that I was going to die or anything like that, but, up in one area of the reformatory, it's called the West Attic. It is where once upon a time, okay, when the reformatory was built, it was built literally as a reformatory, meaning that they wanted to reform the people that came in there. They had some issues. They would come in, they'd stay for a while, and then hopefully be able to go back out to society and join the rest of the world without an issue. It was never meant to be a place for like murderers and those who could never go back to society. But in the early 1900s, the Ohio State Penitentiary, which is where they had death row, there was a horrible fire. This was around Columbus, a horrible fire, and the place burned down. Lots of people died, but they had inmates then that needed to be rehomed for a little while until they could rebuild the penitentiary. So what they did was they shipped some of these hardened criminals up to Mansfield, and they put them in the West Attic, just which is just one massive room that is about half the size of the prison itself, because it's all in one wing, the size of one whole wing. Just one big open room, and they shoved all the guys in there and just kind of left them be to their own devices. um, so today, as you can imagine, from what I understand, the guards didn't even go into that room. They just kind of let them do their own thing. But they put them up in the west attic so that they would be away from the other criminals that were in the regular cells. They didn't want the bad influence to infiltrate. So anyway, today, when you go to Mansfield Reformatory and you're going on a paranormal investigation, if you go up to the west attic, what it's most famously known for is you go and sit. There are no windows at all in this room. There's just one door in and out. And you go to the far end of the room, you sit down, and you just watch. And as you're watching, you'll start to see like ghost lights start to fly around the room, different colors. So that in itself is pretty neat. That's one of my favorite things to see, are like the ghost lights like that. But what happened when we were there, and this has happened multiple times now that I've been there, but the first time that it happened, it was the most stunning, of course. We were sitting there and these lights showed up, and then all of a sudden on the floor at the far end of the room, this light being, it's like the opposite of a shadow person. Like a shadow person that you see, it has the defining characteristics of a human, but it's in shadow. Except except it was in light, because the room was completely dark. We were sitting there in the pitch black, and this was illuminated being that was walking back and forth, and it would walk closer to us, and it would get within, I have no idea how many feet, because it was dark, so it was very difficult to gauge distance. But when it would get fairly close, then it would drop down on all fours and crawl at you, and then it would back up, but it would pace in the room, and it was illuminated. It wasn't like it was, I mean, it was a self-contained light system, light source, but it illuminated enough that when it would go by the wall, you could see the wall start to light up. So we could tell when it was by the wall. We could tell when it was by the cross beams that were in the middle of the room, because those would light up with it. Um, that was terrifying to me, just because that shouldn't exist. Or at least in my mind shouldn't exist. And so that is probably the most terrified I've ever been on an investigation. But after I had that experience, I was not alone. There were other people with me, so at least I had other people to verify what we had all seen. But after I had that experience, I would go on different podcasts or talk to other friends that are in the paranormal community, and I would try to explain this, and no one seemed to have a similar story. They didn't know, like, I don't know what to call this. I still have no name for it. Um, and people would talk about it and want to know if they could see it, if they went as well. And luckily, I was fortunate enough to go back to Mansfield just a few months ago with some friends who had known the story, and I told them, let's go up to West Attic and just see if anything happens. I can't guarantee that you're going to have the same experience as I did. I don't know, but the night that I saw it, we were able to see it multiple times throughout the evening. We would leave and go to other areas of the prison and then come back, and that figure would show up again. Well, sure enough, a couple months ago when I was there with a whole new group of people, they all saw it as well. It manifested again. They all saw it. They were all equally as nervous as I was. And it would get close, and then a couple of the women would say, "Turn the lights on, turn the flashlight on, flashlight on." And then of course, when the light's on, then you don't see anything. But that's my scariest story from ghost hunting in general, but also my story from Mansfield. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And if I'm ever in the area, I definitely want to check it out. Now, did the people that you were with, either time or both times, did they see pretty much what you saw, or was it different experiences for different people, maybe based on their cognition, or was it a shared experience?
So it's interesting that you asked that. The first time that I was there, and the first time I had that experience, we all seemed to see the same thing, because we would sit there, and as we're seeing it, we're like, "What are you seeing? What are you seeing?" And asking each other consistently, and everybody's repeating the same things that they're seeing, the same colored lights, same action of the figure, and so on. So we were all seeing the same thing. this last time that we were there, everybody was seeing it, but it seemed to be, and this was odd as well, it seemed to be doing different things depending on who was seeing it. Like I could see it walk along the wall because I could see the wall illuminate, but as I'm saying that, someone else is saying it's coming right down the middle of the floor, or it's coming to the other side of the room. Like they seem to be, or the one person said they saw it walk up the wall, which I didn't see that at all. Um, but they were seeing different things and sometimes different colors than what I was seeing, which was odd.
And I've always found that interesting, but I liken it to the parable, if you will, or the blind man and the elephant. One says, "Oh, it's got a trunk." The other said, "No, it's flat and wide." The other, "No, it doesn't have a trunk. It has a tail." So even though
Mhm.
they're viewing the same thing, there's a different takeaway, but yet they all experience the same thing. So I think it's kind of like that. And again, just a difference of perception, and maybe it presents itself to different people in different ways. Some
Yeah.
of the things that I've experienced, I had people right along with me that had either a lesser experience or no experience at all. And I
Yeah.
came to the conclusion a few years ago, because every house I've ever lived in was haunted to some degree. And I finally decided it's not the houses that are haunted, it's me. These things choose to reveal themselves to me for whatever reason. I lived in a very, very active house in Las Vegas, probably one of the most active places I've ever lived. Yet, the person I shared the house with that lived there before I did, they'd never experienced anything. It was like when I got there, then all hell broke loose, and then they eventually began to experience things, or at least that they'd admit to. I think before maybe they were just in denial of what was going on there. But again, I don't
Yeah.
know what it is about me. Something imbued in me. Is it the negative RH factor, the green eyes? Is it all that? Am I an alien? Or is this, I subscribe to that theory. I don't think I'm from this planet. I'm just visiting here, got stranded here or something.
There you
Um,
go.
take me home. As long as I can take my wife with me, let's go. And she's like me. She's always been an outsider, even among the outsiders. Is I'm not from this planet. I would go to family reunions and things and think I can't really be related to these people, can I? And I had proof. I had pictures of me right after I was born and all that. I used to think, am I adopted or something? What happened to me? My father and
Yeah.
mother are on a spaceship somewhere. They're going to come back for me one day. If I get abducted, they took me home. But no, I was born there. My grandmother witnessed the birth, and according to her, my mom was knocked out. That was back when they gave women in labor twilight sleep. But I was
Mm.
born with a veil over my face, what they call it in Southern Appalachia, an
Ah,
call. Just the amniotic sac was still stretched over my head and had to have it cut away. But in my superstitious granny's eyes, that marked me as a special child. And out of
yes.
all the grandchildren, and there was a lot, my mom came from a big family, her and 9 brothers. I was the only grandchild born with that condition, and uh, that put a bullseye on me as far as Granny was concerned, and I was
Mhm.
the one she had to pass her legacy on to. And a lot of stuff like that I've read about, it does tend to skip a generation. Now, my mom had some precognition and things, and I don't claim to have any special abilities or anything. It is what it is. But I know things sometimes that I have no way of knowing, not as strongly as my grandmother did, but um,
Right.
I think to some degree you have that, and script you wrote for me on 13 Past Midnight, you talked about your children
Oh,
saying
yes.
things and experiencing things that led you to believe that maybe they were reincarnated or had experiences. You want to expound on that a little bit for our audience?
Yeah, so this happened, I have 3 children, this happened with 2 of them, my 2 oldest. I remember my oldest daughter was probably 3 at the time, 2 or 3 maybe. Well, probably 3 because of how much she was talking, I guess. Um, but we were on our way home from my parents. It was Christmas, I do believe, and we were stopped at a stoplight, and she looked out the window and she looked at the pedestrian signal, and she asked what that was. And I said, "Well, that's to let you know whether you should walk or not, whether it's safe to cross the street." And she was like, "Oh, okay. Yeah." I remember, but I didn't know what that was. Like or how'd she say? I forgot it. I know that now, but I had forgotten it then. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she said, well, back before when I was really old, I was coming home from getting groceries and I could see my house across the street. So I was almost home. And I saw that sign and it was lit up. So it was lit up to say that she shouldn't cross. She's like, but I forgot what it said or what that meant. So I crossed the street anyway and I got hit by a car. And then an ambulance came and picked me up and took me to the hospital. And she was like, nobody was at the hospital. I was alone and it was cold and it was dark. Um, she's like, I was so scared. And I'm like, what do you, and as she's explaining this, she's sobbing. She's just crying like hysterically. And we're trying to calm her down because we're driving and a kid in the back seat that's freaking out is no fun whenever you're you're trying to drive home in the middle of the night.
Mhm.
But she just kept going on. She was very hung up on the being cold and dark and alone part of it. So we eventually got her calmed down and we'd asked her some questions after that. And uh, essentially, she just had this memory of her death, her being everything was cold and dark until all of a sudden there was a light. And then she was here with this family, is what she said. So she just had this story. She said she was very old when it had occurred. And I think she gave me a name at one point in time, but it was just the first name, and that's not enough for me to go on to find any records or anything like that. But that was her story. And then it was 2 years later, my son, who was then 3 as well, he's the middle child. We were sitting in the car waiting for his older sister to get out of school, actually. And he said he saw me on my phone. I was playing a game of some sort, like I don't know if it was Candy Crush or something like that. And he's like, "Oh, my grandma used to play that." Or I think he used a word that we never use. Like I think he might have said Meemaw or something like that, that we don't use that word. He's never said that before. She used to play games like that. And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Thinking about my mom or my husband's mom. And I'm like, "They don't play games like this." And he's like, "No, no, no. My Meemaw from before used to play those games." And I'm like, "Okay, well, tell me about her." And he's like, "Well, she was really nice, and I lived with her, and she was just really great, and I loved her very much." He's like, "It's really sad what happened." And I'm like, "What happened?" And he started to get emotional as well. And he described living with his grandmother, that they had been a wonderful family, and one night or day, I'm not sure if it was night or day, but somebody came into the house and had attacked his grandmother. And he tried to intervene to save her, but wasn't able to do so in time. Therefore, he then spiraled, and he said he was so upset that he wasn't able to save his grandma that he got into a car and he started driving really, really fast. And he said, I drove really fast and then I lost control and I hit a tree. And he said, I even remember what it was like when I hit the tree. And he's like describing in gory detail how he hit the dashboard and so on. It was horrible. Um, he's like, but then it's like I flew out of there and I flew right into your belly. And I'm like, what do you mean you flew into my belly? He's like, well, you were sitting in the living room. He's like, you were sitting here, or you were sitting there in the living room and you were watching TV and eating, and I flew into your belly. And then I was ready to come into this new family. And what was really odd is that in real, like an actual time, whenever I went into labor with him, I was sitting in the living room and I had just gotten food, sat down, started eating, and I was watching wrestling. When the first contraction hit and we had to get to the hospital right away. He was a very quick labor. But yeah, both of them had those stories. Now my third child, she almost seems new to the world in a lot of ways. She doesn't, I don't know, everything seems new to her, at least from watching her grow. Everything seems new and exciting, and just not the old soul kind of thing that you hear about. But yeah, both children had that story of what had occurred to them in their previous life, and that they both, their families before. So, and they both had a horrible ending too. It wasn't like they had this nice story like, yeah, I grew old and I just passed away with my family. No.
Yeah,
They were both
something
violent
traumatic
deaths.
there, but that's still amazing, and to hear that come out of the mouth of a 3-year-old that doesn't have any
Yeah.
concept of any of this and just so matter of factly, and, that's I know kids have great imaginations and stuff, but to have a whole narrative like that, your entire previous story, that would take some doing there. I
Yeah.
believe there's something to all that. I've had other friends that where their child would wake up in the night, crying for one parent or another or a grandparent. Oh, well, they're right here. No, I mean the ones from before. My other mommy, my other daddy, when I lived,
Mhm.
before. And again, small children that have no concept of anything like that. It boggles the mind and it gives you something to ponder and something to think about.
Absolutely, and they grew out of those memories as well. If you were to ask them now, I'm glad that I wrote them down when I did, and shared them with you, and they've been recorded, because when they got to a certain age, they lost those memories. So
On hearing that now, what's their response to that?
they
Anything? Is
just,
there any?
well, my oldest just rolls her eyes. She rolls her eyes at anything that's weird or strange. So she's like, "Yeah, okay, mom." My son, he just, he's like, "Yeah, I think I remember saying that, maybe." But he doesn't, it just doesn't phase him.
Yeah, that's strange. A lot of those memories, early childhood memories like that, leave people. I've known people that couldn't remember anything before they were 4 or 5 years old, but I can remember vivid detail, like when I was still in diapers and stuff. And just again, I've been blessed with a near photographic memory, and it goes way back. My youngest memory is when I was 6 months old. Um,
Wow.
I remember going to a place with my dad where a house was being built, and they just had the foundation and had a roof on it, and they had part of the interior wall started, but it was basically just a big open space. I remember him picking me up and put me up in there, and I ran around on the subflooring. And I mentioned that to my dad when I was like probably in my 30s or something. When I was little, where did we go to one time? And I described that scenario, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, that was the house you grew up in." But he said, "You were only 6 months old." He said, "There's no way you can remember that." But yet I did. So I didn't know where it was. I didn't know it was the house I grew up in. I didn't remember that part, but I remembered
Right.
being there that and describing that situation exactly as it happened. So
That's
strange how
wild.
some things like that will stick with you and other things maybe have no memory of or something that I did in elementary school or even high school. I'll come back to me like, oh yeah, I remember when that happened. But um, I've had that happen too, where I would mention something that happened in school years and people that was there with me. I don't remember that. I'm like, yeah, you do. You were right there with me. We talked about it. I'm sorry, I don't remember. Maybe it was just so traumatic for them, they blotted it out. I don't know. But
Yeah.
getting back into the school part of this, now I mentioned in the introduction there that you're a classics professor.
Mhm.
How do your students feel about your other fields of interest and fields of endeavor? Is that something you ever discuss with them, or do you keep your lives separate?
Yeah, they're pretty separate. They're not aware of it unless they were to look into my name, I guess. So that isn't something that comes up. Now, I did actually last fall speak with a college class that was not mine. It was an English class, I believe, just talking to them about kind of following what you enjoy whenever you go out into the professional world, and then hoping that hoping that that becomes something that's fruitful later. Um, so they were asking me all kinds of questions about the world of the weird, and how I got to be in there, and how that actually became a job. 'Cause that's always the hope, right?
And yeah, yeah, I love that, and it is. It's such a blessing to get to do what I do and
Mhm.
make a living doing it. Otherwise I'd be working in a bookstore or a record store or pumping gas or something because I'm not fit for any kind of normal employment, which I've
Yep.
proven over time, and I've worn a lot of hats. I've been network administrator. I've been technical support for a large medical group. I've worked construction, demolition, done a little bit of everything, but writing and talking seems to be my forte. My dad uh, gave me that when I was little because I talked a lot. And he said, boy, he said, if you can ever find a way to get paid for talking, you'll be set. And here I am. So
There you
thanks,
go.
Dad.
Thanks, Dad. Yeah. He called it.
Same one that used to accuse me of having the ability to talk until I knew what I wanted to say. And that's true. I've always been very glib, had the gift of gab. And one of my favorite classes that I ever took in college was extraneous speaking, or I'm sorry, extemporaneous speaking. And people were panicking. They gave you your topic on an index card and you had 5 minutes to prepare. And I said to the prof, I said, that's not extemporaneous. You're giving me 5 minutes. I said, I want you to hand me my card when I get on the podium. And he said, you're sure you want to do this? And I, yes, sir. And I did it.
Yeah.
And I gave a wonderful talk. It was about the Versailles Peace Treaty or something, but I knew enough about it to compare and contrast and get through it. And he was impressed. And he said, I bet you can't do it again. And I said, I bet I can. And I could do that every time. And it's just, uh, I've always read a lot and just have a broad base of knowledge. And it has provided me with the ability to jack of all trades, if you will, a polymath. I know a little bit about a lot of different things, but I'm really not an expert in any area. And in fact, nothing scares me away any faster than to be described as an expert in the paranormal or cryptids or anything, or for
Mhm.
somebody to be introduced to me that, oh, this is Joe Smith. He's an expert in the paranormal. Okay. I don't think
Yeah.
there are any experts. I think we're all on a quest for more knowledge. And I gave up looking for the answers a long time ago, Heather. I've often said that now I'm just looking for the next set of questions. And
Right.
if we had all the answers, my journey, my personal journey, would have been near as much fun and enjoyable as it has been. And Soraya Askath from Where'd the Road Go? He once quipped that it's like this big jigsaw puzzle that we're trying to put together, but we don't
Mhm.
have the box to even see what the picture is that we're trying to make. And yet,
Yeah.
the farther we get into it, we discover that some cosmic joker has mixed maybe a dozen puzzles together. So maybe the one that we're working on, there are pieces that don't fit anywhere. And I thought that was very good description.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. That seems to be definitely the way it is. Always coming away with more questions than answers, that's for sure.
And that's the way it's supposed to be. And when I've talked about my first full body apparition, uh, long story short, a little boy ran out from behind a car that was stopped at a intersection. The driver didn't act like he saw it or whatever at all, didn't acknowledge it in the least. Ran candy corner down into our yard, fell down and disappeared. Small child. I didn't take my eyes off the spot, went straight to the spot. Nothing there, nothing I could have mistaken for a child, nothing, no hole or anything that somebody could have fallen into. I knew every inch of that yard. And
Mhm.
we lived quite a ways back off the road, 213 feet from the edge of our garage to the edge of the road. I measured it later in life when I was doing BMX sprints. But I was about 100 feet out in the yard. Saw this happen, went right to the spot, nothing there. I even went and got a shovel out of my dad's tool shed and dug in that spot to see if there was something buried there or something. And I told that story to Cisco Murdoch, and she said, you know, Steve, you've never put down that shovel. You're still digging. And I am. I'm still looking for the disappearing child. That was what started me on my journey. And I asked my granny
Wow.
about that. She was very intuitive, a self-described gypsy witch. I don't know where the gypsy part came in, but told fortunes, read tea leaves and coffee grounds, animal entrails, things like that. And I asked her about that, and she said, well, a very cryptic answer. Sometimes you see things that are meant for you to see. Other times you see things that are meant for other people to see, and you just happen to see it. Sometimes you'll just see things that there's no rhyme or reason, no explanation that you'll never know, even in retrospect. So there you go. I don't know, and I still
There
don't
you
know, but
Yeah.
it started me on this journey of, what was that? It didn't scare me. It's just like, what was that? What just happened? What did I just witness? And off I
Yeah.
went.
How old were you when that happened?
Was 4,
Wow. Wow.
and that's, I've talked to a lot of people that between the ages of 3 and 5, that seems to be the prime optimal time to have these experiences that either shut you down to where you don't care or make you curious for the rest of your life.
Right. Yeah.
But more so, it makes you curious. And I said it started me on a lifelong quest, and I haven't gotten any further. I'm still in that yard digging with a shovel. It's just somebody else's yard and a different shovel now, but still looking for answers.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Now, you talked about some of your early experiences. Was that the one that kind of set you on this path, or were there several? Because I had other experiences. I had more around the age of um, between 5 and 6, and then again around 7 and 8. It continued on. It just was nonstop at that point, and still that way to a degree.
Hmm.
But was that your impetus? Was that your aha moment when you thought, there's something else out here, and I got to find out what it is?
Well, I mean, I was always intrigued by, like I said, watching unsolved mysteries, but beyond that, just in a more personal vein, my mom would tell me since I was young that she grew up in a haunted house. And I would ask her questions about that, like, how did you know it was haunted? And she told me this story about when she was younger that my grandmother had bought them a Ouija board for Christmas. And she technically bought it for my aunt, but it was, of course, that's a group effort for to play a Ouija board, but or it should be, I guess. Anyway, so they were sitting and playing with the Ouija board. My aunt's freaked out about it, but it started to spell out that there was a spirit in the house. It said that her name was Elizabeth and that she lived in my mother's room. So mom would tell me this story, and she also then ended it with my aunt got too freaked out and then had my grandmother burn the board, which whatever. She had her burn the board. So, uh, as I would grow up, we would always drive past that my mother's childhood home on the way to visit my grandparents because they had moved just down the road into a different house when they got older. And she would always point to the house and she would point to the window that was hers and she'd be like, "That's Elizabeth's room." And I still know because I live not far from that place now, which room was Elizabeth's room. But I grew up hearing that story, and I was in third grade, I believe, whenever mom bought me my first Ouija board. And I would play on that thing with my dad, with mom, and my mom's friend that would come over and do her hair. She was really gifted with tarot cards and Ouija boards and things like that. We would play on it all the time. And it just was, I guess. There was a Ouija board in the house, and it was something that we would get on and talk to every once in a while. It's not something that I was like addicted to by any means or anything like that, but it was something that was there. It existed, and it was what it was. Mom grew up in a haunted house. She just grew up in a haunted house. There wasn't a question about it. And I think just growing up in that realm helped precipitate me being in this world that I'm in now. It just was, it just existed. And then as far as where mom grew up, many years later, it was after I had started working with Smalltown Monsters, and I started writing for Shannon LeGros for the Weird Writer blog. I decided, let me take some of my skills that I've learned as an adult and see if I can find any truth to this Elizabeth story. So I went to the county courthouse and started looking up land records. And I found actually there was an Elizabeth Leidy that lived in that house. She was on the deeds, um, which in itself was rare because this was in the 1800s to have a female on the deeds, but she was there. So there was an Elizabeth that lived in that house for real. um, and it was like a full circle moment to have that come back around and see that that was something that I could actually verify from this childhood story because I just always knew the name was Elizabeth and that she supposedly lived in that house. And sure enough, there she is on paper. If you go to the county courthouse, you can find her. But that's how I kind of grew up with all of this stuff. It just existed. It was there and without question. Um, I had a moment whenever I was younger. I was probably in middle school, I would say, when my parents had left to go to the store or something. they weren't home either way. And I was sitting in the living room playing with the dogs and the cats and just watching TV, and all of a sudden all the animals froze and they looked behind me, and it threw me off. Obviously, that they just suddenly stopped and they're all staring in the same place. So I turned around and looked, and in the doorway leading to the dining room right behind me, there was a man standing in the doorway. Um, Now he was in like Native American garb, but when I first saw him, I just had this calming feeling of, "Oh, that's just dad." Like, it was just a fatherly type feeling. I wasn't concerned, I wasn't scared, I just saw him and I was like, "Oh," and I turned back around, and then it caught up to me, "Wait a second, that's not dad." When I turned back to look a second time, it was gone and the animals had resumed back what they were doing. Um, so we, of course, asked the Ouija board about that later, and I was told that it was a guardian that was there. But I don't know. Things like that would happen. I would hear footsteps go up and down the hallway, because there's definitely a way to tell the difference between mom and dad's footsteps. They sounded differently if they'd get up in the middle of the night and walk out to get a glass of water or something. And it always sounded like dad getting up and walking. But when I would get up to check, it wasn't dad. There would be nobody there. So I would think in my head, oh, that's just that guardian walking down the hallway again. Um, so stuff like that is kind of what I grew up with, and I think helped me be
Yeah.
the person I am now.
And I agree. If you're around it and you're exposed to it, like especially in the case of my mom, I mean, their natural was a supernatural. They had regular seances, table tipping or table tapping, Ouija boards, card readings, and stuff. They grew up
Mhm.
with it, and they just didn't know any different. And her family were a part of the spiritualism movement from around the turn of the last century, and the way they got into it initially, they had a relative that never came back from World War One, and they could never find out what happened to him. I think that ended 1918, something like that. I'm a
Mm.
little rusty with my figures here, but that was how they initially got into it. And just as a little girl, my mom participated in those things and knew about those things, and even up till the time she married my dad. Prior to them getting married, the first time she ever took him to meet her family, they were doing a table tapping session. And now my dad, he grew up hard scrabble Appalachia, but he got out and went to University of Tennessee, my alma mater, and was already on his path to civil engineering and then later a scientist. But he said, it mystified him. He said they sounded like a bunch of heathens. They were all sitting around, rise, table, rise, rise, rise. But he said he looked around at every angle. He made sure, nobody had their toe under one of the table legs, making it rise. Nobody
Mhm.
had a ruler up their sleeve under the table edge, and making it lift up an old parlor magic trick or anything like that. He said there was
Right.
something unseen force raising that table. And he talked about they would even take some of the grandkids, or maybe even some of the smaller kids at that time, because my mom had younger siblings, put them on the table and try to get it to rise. And he said that old farm table creaked and groaned and tried every way in the world to rise up with that added weight on there, and it just couldn't do it. But he
Oh
said, I
my.
have no explanation for it. And later in life, he would talk about things that happened in a laboratory setting. He said that there'd be times when they were doing an experiment under extremely controlled conditions, when things would just happen that weren't supposed to happen. They could never get it to happen again. They don't know how it happened, yet it happened. Some anomalous result, he called it. And there used to be a zine that I read back in the 80s called the Journal of Irreproducible Results. And it mentioned things like that, how sometimes, despite everything we do, the natural laws that we've come up with, they don't always correspond with supernatural laws and things. And to me, that's just fascinating. That
Mhm.
here's a scientist, but yet he has a belief in the supernatural, and
Yeah.
I get it. And he experienced things, when he was growing up. Now they weren't as steeped in it as my maternal grandmother and her family, but they had their share of it. And tales passed around, and hauntings, and inexplicable things in the woods and stuff. So it was there. But I said on the belief whole thing that I was born out of the union of science and superstition. And I sprang forth with the best of both and bewildered. And here I still am. So
That's
But
worked.
it does, it sticks with you, and I had Ouija board experiences too. I got my first one. I don't think I was quite 6 years old yet. It was between kindergarten and 1st grade, probably that summer, or it might have been the fall that I started, um, 1st grade. I talk about it in one of my videos, but, I was sick that day and I've been to the doctor, had ear, nose, and throat problems my entire
Mhm.
life, had to have tonsils and adenoids out when I was 5. That was traumatic. Don't catch colds or the flu. The only time I've ever had the flu, I took a flu shot in 1985 and got the flu and thought I was gonna die. Haven't had the flu since, haven't had a flu shot since. So either that one worked really, really good or it gave me the flu. But, I'd been for some ENT malady, and we had to stop by the drugstore to get my prescription filled. And, I'd wandered back to the toy aisle. My mom was gonna let me get something, and I saw the Ouija board, and it was the old box with the dark background and the stars and like a blue hooded figure on the
Mhm.
front of it, like a robed figure. What is this? And she kind of explained it to me, like, "Oh, I want one. Can I have it?" So she got me one, and I still remember sitting in that. I think it was a '62 Chevy 2, sitting in the back seat of that with my Ouija board in my lap. And then when we got home, opened it up, and she gave me, some caveats. Don't ask anything you don't want it to know. Don't do it by yourself. Don't ask it about your death or somebody's close to your death, things like that. Don't
Mhm.
invite anything in that you meet on the board. Just
Right.
some general warnings about it. And then that day we used it, and school must have been in session because I remember the first thing I ever asked it was, "When will it snow this year?" And it gave a date, and I marked it on the calendar, and I looked forward to that date because I love snow, still do. Loved a snow day though. Who didn't?
Yeah.
And sure enough, a couple days prior to that, nope, not going to snow. No snow in the forecast. But then overnight, where we lived there in East Tennessee, there was a low that moved south of us, and when that happened, and the conditions were right with the barometric pressure in the wintertime, we get a snow. Snow dumped on us, had a snow day on the day it said
Oh,
sometime
man.
prior.
That's awesome.
And then the next thing, there was a record of circus music that I coveted from kindergarten, and wasn't able to find it at any of the places I bought records. I was a huge vinyl connoisseur even as a child, even though mostly children's records. But there was this record that they played for us in kindergarten that I just had to have. So um, we got the Ouija board out, we consulted it, and it gave us the name of a fairly obscure used record store on Market Square in downtown Knoxville. And sure enough, my mom looked it up in the phone book back when there used to be such a thing as a phone book. And back then, even though they were just a few miles apart, it was long distance to call Knoxville from where we lived in West Knox County. We had an Oak Ridge number.
Mhm.
And she called the record store and I gave the title of the record to the guy, and he said, "I don't know. I'll look and see." He's like, "I've got thousands of records in here, used records." He said, "But if I run across it, I'll call you." And I thought, okay, great. I'm not even 6 yet. I thought, now that's the end of that. I'll just keep looking. But sure enough, I don't remember if it was later that day or maybe the next day, we got a call. It was the guy calling back, and he said, "I was in the back. I was looking for something else, and I just happened to spot that because I'd given a detailed description of what the cover looked like." And,
Right.
he said that just it fell open, and there it was in the stacks back there in my albums. And, I've got it here. I'll hold it for you
Wow.
if you want me to. And of course, I begged my mom. And a few days later, we took the trip downtown. And this was back when you shopped downtown. This is before the real advent of strip malls or any malls. The thing, you went
Mhm.
downtown to went shopping. You had to get dressed up. My mom would wear heels and pearls and everything. But we went downtown. We went some other places. I think we went to J.C. Penney's and we had lunch at uh, Crestjes and things like that, just things that you did downtown. We had a certain
Mhm.
lot where we'd park, and my mom knew the parking attendant there. Her family had sold produce there at there was a produce market not too far from there, a huge one. And sure enough, we got to the record store. The guy had it, and I rode home with it in my lap. Thank you, Ouija. But again, not everybody has a good experience or a positive experience, but Cisco and I have talked about that. It's a tool, And a
Yeah.
lot of it goes on the intent, what you're going to do with it. These days, I wouldn't touch one. I'm not afraid of them. I've had some experiences later. I'll go ahead and tell that story. Um,
Yeah.
I was in college. I was working at a little restaurant part time, and the guy invited me to a party after work. It was at an apartment complex just down the road from where we were working there in the Cedar Bluff area of West Knoxville. I thought, sure, I'll go. I didn't really want to go study or anything anyway, not that night. And I get there, it's in the clubhouse of this big apartment complex. I didn't know anybody there besides the guy that invited me from work, and I didn't really know him other than just from work. So I don't know if they had it with them or if they found it or something, but anyway, some girls came up with a Ouija board, and they decided that they would get 3 or 4 of them to do it, and they would go around this room in the clubhouse and ask questions. And they got to me, and the only thing I said was, "What scared me when I was a child?" And I had a specific, very specific incident in mind. It was the thing in the woods that chased me out of the woods that I couldn't see. I never
Mhm.
told that story outside the family at that point. My immediate family knew it, but certainly I never told it to the guy that I worked with, and none of the people at the party knew it. But the girls that are working the board, it starts doing the figure eight, and it spells out WATERSPRITE. And they look at me. I just kind of shrugged, and there's water sprite. It's thirsty. It wants a drink. Ha 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 ha. Ha. And then they went on to somebody else. But my next day off, which might have been the next day, I went to the big library downtown, and I went up to the reference desk and I said, "What can you tell me about a water sprite or a water spirit?" The reference librarian goes off into the stacks. A few minutes later, she comes back. She's got some books there, and she showed me a book. You probably know about this kind of stuff. There was 2 of them. There was a naiad and a dryad. One was a
Mm.
spirit of the water, and the other was a spirit of the woods. They're very similar, but they're elementals, a type of the fae, if you will.
Yep.
And according to the Ouija board, that's what chased me out of the woods was a water spirit. And it wasn't some little gossamer Tinkerbell thing. This thing shook the ground and knocked branches out of the way higher than my head. I could see the leaves being kicked up in its wake. I couldn't see it, but I could see the effects it was having on the natural environment. Ran me out of the woods not once, but twice. Once at 8 years old, again at 15 years old. But
Mhm.
according to the Ouija board, it was a fae folk, an elemental, a naiad.
Yeah. Yep. Wanting you
So
out of there for some reason.
there you go. And why only me? My dad, my brother both went up there and looked around. I even I brought a kid home with me from school one time. I sent him up there to go and stand by the edge of the ditch and see if you see anything. And I stood way down the hill from behind a tree, and he's just looked at looking around. Nope, nothing. But nothing came out of the woods and chased him, or out of the ditch rather. And then I even got brave. I went up closer to the edge of the ditch and had him stand down the hill. It didn't chase me, but the 2 times that I went up there alone, one at 8 and one again at 15, chased me right out of there. What was that? Well, I mean, what do you know
So,
anything about a naiad?
just basically what you said, they're water spirits, then the dryads are the wood spirits. Um, they're in classical mythology, and, normally when they're talked about, they're not I mean, any spirits from classical mythology don't tend to be like Tinkerbell type spirits either,
Yeah.
as far as that goes.
And that's the thing, you dig into the fae folk, and particularly in Celtic countries where that was almost a religion, may still be, they're evil creatures. You had to appease them, and they would trick you, and there's only like one, and there's different clans and different types. There's one type of them that's kinda nice. I think those are pixies or something, but
Mhm.
I can't articulate all I know about it, but they're not nice things, but they describe things like, in Ireland, the story I read from these late 1700s, maybe early 1800s, about some little men in a horseless carriage that came down from the sky. Well, there's a UFO experience. Or there were
Right.
types of them that were big hairy men that lived in the woods. There's Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Yowie or whatever.
Mhm.
It's kind of an umbrella that everything else fits under. But you can talk to a Bigfoot enthusiast or a UFO experiencer and mention the Fae, they'll snicker at you. They're like, "Oh, that doesn't." But I think it
Right.
does. I think it all ties together. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm sorry to
Yeah,
put you on
I
the spot
agree.
here.
No, it's fine. No, I think that it all ties together, and I think that we'd get more I mean, we talked about earlier how you end up with more questions than answers, but I think that we'd end up with some more answers if we would all kind of work together and get over this. Well, this is real, but that's not kind of situation. It's all weird. It's all strange. So there's definitely corresponding things about UFOs, between ghosts, between cryptids, that just overlap one another. That if we were to take the time and actually communicate with one another, I think that we might have more answers. I'm not saying that we would have answers to everything, but we would have more than what we have now. At least that's my belief.
I agree, and it would fit it within a broader scope from which to do those studies and things from. But yeah, people will fight you over their
Oh
individual
yeah.
beliefs. I've seen that happen at Bigfoot conferences, and then when I spoke at a UFO conference in San Francisco, yeah, a couple of years ago now. I would see people almost get into fistfights over stuff, and like, that's not why we're
Mhm.
here to argue. We're here to present our opinion, not necessarily to defend it. And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't get that. On this show, I've had a couple of pastors on from Sound the Shofar Messianic Ministries, and look at the paranormal and UFOs and things like that from not only a biblical perspective, but from the perspective of the Torah. Being Messianic Jews, they follow both the Torah and the Bible, and they
Mhm.
had some interesting things to say. Again, people, it's controversial, and not everybody's going to agree with it, but I like to keep an open mind. I don't think, especially when you have something like this, that there are no experts and there are no answers. There is no right or wrong opinion, but I like to hear other people's opinion. I didn't invite them here any of the times that they've been on to beat them up about it or get them to defend it. I just want to
Mhm.
know what that opinion is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's weird, like, not only do you see the fighting between the different groups, between like UFOs and ghosts and Bigfoot and things like that, but we also, as humans, apparently like to fight about anything we can fight about, and there's infighting even within those particular communities. Um, the in the Bigfoot community, people will take a side as to what they think Bigfoot is, and then that's the only way. They don't want to hear any other arguments to it. And the same thing with Dogman. I mean, it gets pretty vicious sometimes, and I just don't understand it. I don't get why we're so drawn to wanting to fight and have all of this drama instead of trying to figure things out. Like you said, we don't have experts in this field. We don't have the answers like that. So what are we doing?
It reminds me of the movie from the 70s, The Warriors. Did you ever see that, about the gangs
Mm,
in New York City? And
uh-uh.
Cyrus, the leader of all the gangs, was trying to tell them that. He said, "We're here, between us, we're fighting over a few square feet of sidewalk, our turf." He said, "But if we band together, we outnumber everybody, the police and everything, and we could run New York City." And then they killed him. But and that was
No.
the whole movie, was the Warriors got blamed for it, and they were trying to make their way back to their turf, which was at Coney Island. It's a great movie. It's very dated, but that's always stuck with me. We're here fighting over a few feet of sidewalk, when if we band
Mhm.
together, we're bigger than everything out there.
Yeah, exactly.
A nice way I worked the name of the show in there unintentionally. Everything out there.
There you go. Perfect.
Unintended plug there for my own show. So, Heather, what have you got coming up? You mentioned some of the small town monster stuff. What else is going on for you?
Well, I recently had a short story printed in something called Dark Village. It's an anthology of different short stories.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. That short story is called The Wendigo. And that one was a lot of fun to write. A different kind of playing with perspective a little bit on that. So I've got that. And then I have articles in the Feminine Macabre series in journals 1, 3, and 5. So I talk about cursed objects, particularly the rocks from the Bell Witch Cave in the first journal. In the third one, I talk about headless ghosts. And then in the fifth one, I talk about Goatman, which reminds me, I wanted to ask you, Steve, if you've heard of any Goatman stories from Tennessee.
Not from Tennessee in particular, but let me look into my research, and I'll get back with you on that. I did uh, something about the Goat Man or Goat Men
Hmm.
recently. Barton Nunley wrote a thing for me, and I narrated it for a project I had called Weird World. But I've got some other stuff. Let me look and see.
Nice.
But
Awesome.
There's just everything you mentioned there is something that I've looked into at one time or another. You
Yeah.
mentioned the Bell Witch. Now, growing up in East Tennessee, that was a big deal for me. Not as much as it was for kids in Middle Tennessee. But
Right.
I told you a story that you'd never heard about a Bloody Mary type game that we played in grade school that was based on the Bell Witch, and
Right.
worked kind of the same. You went into a darkened bathroom and you peered into the mirror, and instead of saying Bloody Mary three times, you said, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch" three times, and
Oh.
she would supposedly come out of the mirror and scratch you on the face. And I was at a kid party one time, somebody's birthday party. I was maybe 8, 9 years old. And the little girl went in the bathroom, did that. Sure enough, she came running out screaming, had 3 scratches on her face. Now, probably
Mhm.
self-inflicted, but it uh, scared the pants off all the little kids at that party anyway.
Well, sure. Yeah, you definitely don't wanna mess with the Bell Witch, that's for sure.
And I also told you the story about how the library book at the big library in Knoxville was perpetually checked out. You couldn't find, I can't remember the name of the book. It was one of the preeminent Bell Witch books.
Mhm.
And the story that was told when it finally did come back after a couple of years, it was said that then it was in the special collections. You could only look at it there at the library, probably because it was a rare book. But
Yeah.
the story that was told on the playground was that when they finally found it, the guy that had checked it out for a couple of years was found dead in his bed, and that was what he was reading. And he had been there for some time, nothing but a skeleton left. But they
Oh
returned the
my.
book to the library, and that's why nobody could check it out because it was cursed.
That's quite a story.
Made for
That is
interesting playground fodder. Some of the that would be a book right there, the strange things on the playground, and have
Yeah.
people recount their stuff they heard as kids. I've done stuff about urban legends and stories, from a friend of a friend, gospel truth. Oh no, that really happened. It happened to our neighbor's
Mhm.
cousin's uncle's nephew. But
Right. Yeah.
that nothing shattered my world. Is John or Jan Harold Brunvand. I
Mhm.
think he's a professor of folklore and mythology and somewhere in Utah. He put
Yeah.
out a book in the 70s called The Vanishing Hitchhiker was the fast one he did, or the first one. He did a
Yeah.
series of books. And a lot of those stories, I'd heard those as gospel truth growing up. No, no, that happened to my cousin. No, that one
Yeah.
happened to a friend of a lady that does my mom's hair. These stories happen, but they didn't. And
Right.
they served as cautionary tales and um, kept me out of some trouble. Probably, kept me out of the lake because of water moccasins, or kept me from going to the bathroom at Walmart because some kid was mutilated in there as part of a gang initiation. The forerunner to
Right.
Walmart, we had a local store there in Knoxville. I think it was local, called Almart, Almart. And the story was that the kid, it was around his 8th birthday. He had wanted to go to the bathroom by himself. He's like, "Mom, I'm too big to go to the ladies' room with you. I'll go by myself." So she stands there, waits on him. He goes to the bathroom. He's gone, 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 gone. Never comes out. Instead of going in and looking for him, the next male that starts in, she said, "Sir, would you tell me if there's a little boy in there?" And describes him. Guy goes in, he comes running back out. He said, "Lady, um, you better get in there with him. I'm going to go up front and ask him to call an ambulance." And as part of a gang initiation, and she had mentioned earlier in the story that she saw 3 dirty looking boys come out of there, 3 trashy looking boys come out. Well, they'd been part of a gang, and as part of initiation, they castrated this little boy
Oh my
and
goodness.
threw his member in the parking lot where it was run over by a car and couldn't be saved. He had to have a sexual reassignment surgery and change schools. But I
Wow.
heard that as a kid and believed every single word of it. I was in there with
Sure.
my parents one time. I had to go to the bathroom. I couldn't even find my mom and dad. So instead of braving, this was the Walmart on Clinton Highway. Instead of going in there by myself, I went outside around the building around in the back in the dark and peed on the wall. When it was much more danger back there of something happening to me. But,
Yes.
that was so ingrained in my head that I'm not gonna go to the bathroom in there. I know what happens in there. I'll go outside and pee by the dumpster. But
Mhm. Mhm.
again,
Yeah.
that story was in there. I think The Severed Penis was the name of it. But again, I heard that as gospel truth and believed it. And the one
Yep.
about the Avon lady that wasn't an Avon lady, that was a man in a dress, and in his Avon sample bag, he had a hatchet and a hank of rope and some handcuffs, and Oh, that
Oh my goodness.
and the beauty shop, the beauty parlor, and back in my day, in the late '60s, early '70s, a lot of women, particularly in our community in East Tennessee, they would have those shops in their basement. Not
Mhm.
only did they make a few extra bucks doing hair, but they got all the neighborhood gossip. I heard
Yeah.
similar stories from both. My mom got her hair done, two different ladies, because they were both friends, her friends, so she alternated. But heard those stories at both beauty shops when I would tag along and sit in one of the dryer chairs while my mom was getting a permanent. But
Yep.
again, I grew up, and some of the others are the one about the kid water skiing and running into a nest of water moccasins and dying before they could get him out of the water. My aunt from Alabama told that it happened to a friend that her or a kid that her son went to school with in Scottsboro, Alabama. Never happened. But again, it was just such a part of childhood
Sure.
fears and things. And
Yeah, that's what you were talking about, the book always being checked out. It reminds me of, the book that was always checked out when I was in elementary school was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Um, and that one had very similar things. It had, well, all kinds of scary stories, so to speak, but mostly urban legends. And so there were stories of like the spot, where somebody had what looked like a pimple on their face, but it was actually spider eggs had
yeah,
been nested on their face, and then it would just explode, and there'd be spiders everywhere,
yeah,
things
that
like
was an
that.
urban legend too. And
Yep.
the tale that I heard from the '60s was it was a bouffant hairdo. The girl had her hair piled up, and rather than take
Mhm.
it down, she just kept lacquering it with hairspray until it was just a solid mass of hair. And spiders got in there and laid eggs, and they hatched out, and they were like eating into her brain or something. I don't know. It was
Mhm.
frightening, but yeah, that's another one of those. Oh, it had happened, but it didn't.
Yep. Yep. But
No,
learning tools, trying to scare the
uh,
kids.
yeah, and I'm just getting into the stories told in the dark. My wife's from that era. She was born in '85, and
Mhm.
I've come to appreciate those in the Goosebumps series. I never really paid much
Oh, yeah.
attention to those, but she was big into that. So we've got a collection of R.L. Stein books going here, and
That's
uh,
pretty awesome.
and I loved the Scholastic stuff when I was a kid. Mrs. Coverlet's
Yeah.
Magicians, and what was the other one that I absolutely adored? The Mad Scientist Club by Burton Brindley, and it's just
Mm. Uh,
those books
there
just spurred me on, and there was a lot of spooky stuff back then too,
yeah.
and some of the truer
Yeah.
stuff, the Frank Edwards books, Strange World, Stranger Than Science, Stranger Than Fiction.
Mhm.
I read a lot of that was introduction to a lot of stuff within the paranormal realm, the supernatural for me, and everything in there wasn't supernatural. Some of it was just strange, but those
Right,
stories
right.
had a way. The David Lang disappearance, where the guy was walking across a field and disappeared in full view of his wife and children, and the two guys in a buggy coming up the road. That was the first place I ever heard that was in a Frank Edwards book. So
Mhm.
books are the key.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
books were always an escape for me. I didn't have any friends, but I had a lot of books, and
Yeah. We used to
like that
have this
to this day.
we used to have this program called RIF, Reading is
Yeah, reading
Fundamental.
is fundamental.
Yeah, and, that's where I got introduced to a series called The Bailey School Kids, and the first book that I picked up from that series happened to be the first book from the series, luckily, but it was called Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, and it
Love it.
follows these kids that, every time there's, like, a new teacher, a new janitor or something, they have this theory that they're a vampire, another one's like, "Ghosts don't eat potato chips," or whatever,
Yeah, I
and,
love it. My wife's mentioned those books too. She's a fan of those. I need to read those.
they are so good. I have, like, the first 20 some still from whenever I was a child. I've got them on the shelf over here, but, um, that also brought me into that world because there was a Bigfoot one, there was a werewolf one, there was a vampire one, there was a goblin. I think there was even, like, well, I know there was a leprechaun one. Um, but yeah, they covered all kinds of things like that, and so I read more of those than I did the Goosebumps series. I did read Goosebumps, but I was into the Bailey School Kids a little bit more.
And this was another touchstone for her. Are You Afraid of the Dark? Did you watch
Oh,
those
yeah.
shows?
Yes. Yes, I did.
And in fact, that's one of the names she uses on YouTube is Midnight Society, and
Nice.
that's
Nice.
that's how I first noticed her when she was coming and listening to me. That name stood out to me in the chat, and it just kind of went from there. But we watched those, and I'm a big fan. I watched them as an adult. I was in, college, but I love those shows. And DJ McHale, who wrote a lot of those and a lot of them under a pen name because he didn't want his name all over everything. He's a friend of mine. I'm going to have him on the show sometime. But he influenced a whole generation of kids there. And for a kids show, and you'll see if you agree here, that was some of the scariest stuff ever on television.
Yeah. Yeah. They did a good job with it. That's for sure.
But I'd like to talk to R.L. Stein too. I've got some juvenile
Goodness,
fiction
yes.
that turned in the works, and my wife's working on a book too that in that same vein, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And I love the idea of writing for kids, but I don't know. I turned 60 last year. I don't know if I'm so far out of touch that I couldn't write for this generation of kids, but I'd like to give it a try.
Right. I think you should do it. I support this wholeheartedly.
Okay, well, thank you. But now you mentioned the Weird Writer blog. There was some of your articles over there that I wanted you to do for 13 Past Midnight, and you did, thankfully. Do you still write for that? Does Heather still do that? I've been out of the loop on a lot of this peripheral stuff for a while. I'm not sure what's going on.
No, I haven't written for Shannon in a while.
Did I say Heather? I meant Shannon.
Yeah, that's okay. She basically got to a point where she was like, "Listen, you need to start writing for yourself and get more things out there. Quit writing for me."
There were some good ones.
So
One that particularly stands out is Witches and Silver Bullets.
yes,
Do you remember that one?
yes,
And I think you
yes, I do.
narrated that one as well. And
I
that's
did.
I'd always heard about the silver bullet as as a way to fend off the wolf man, but I'd
Hmm.
never heard of it being used against witches. So that was educational for me.
Yeah, that's I had found a lot of that in Patrick Gaynor's Witches, Ghosts, and Signs. There are stories in there about the silver bullet, and even in the Bell Witch story, there was a guy who claimed to be a witch hunter, came in with a silver bullet, waving it around, saying that he could handle the witch. And of course, she put him to shame and had him running out crying by the end of it. But yeah, it is something like you said. Most people think about it's keeping the werewolves away, but witches are known to be that's one of their weaknesses are the silver bullets.
Now, my granny used garlic, and even though she was a self-proclaimed witch, there were other witches that she didn't want anything to do with. Um, and the old farmhouse she lived in, old Victorian farmhouse, had the old keyholes in the doors, and she would put a
Mhm.
clove of garlic in there to keep witches from coming through the keyhole. Have you ever heard anything like that?
Yeah, well, not putting garlic in there, but definitely heard about them coming through the keyhole and shape shifting into like black cats and things like that to get
Yeah, they could come down the
into a
fireplace
house.
too. And
Hmm.
what was the other thing she used to do? Now, of course, when anybody died, they hung cloth over the mirror, but that was to keep the spirit from getting trapped in the house. Their porches, the ceiling of the porch, the roof of the porch, the underneath of it anyway, was always painted haint blue. Have you ever heard the story behind that?
Yes. Yes.
That a spirit coming up to enter the house, up to no good, would look up and see that and think it was the sky and fly up through the porch roof and be gone.
Hmm.
Must have worked because I don't think her house was haunted. But really enjoy a lot of the folklore and stuff, particularly from the Southern Appalachians. I mean, that's where I grew up, but sounds like there's parts of that in the Appalachians that are close to you there too, the northern part.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's definitely been interesting to look at some of the overlap between the northern and the southern Appalachians in our stories. It's just that it seems like there was a higher degree of storytelling in general in the southern Appalachians, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that seems to be written down more, at least officially written down more in books than there were in the northern Appalachians, and I find
Well,
that kind of sad.
and I attribute that to people like you may have never heard of him, but there was a guy in Knoxville that wrote in the paper named Bert Vincent, and he had a column on Sundays. I think it was like Just Walking About or something like that. He
Mhm.
had 2 volumes out of there was a little bit of everything in there, but there was a lot of haint and booger and witch tales from the Smokies in that area. And had both those books growing up, had them around the house. Had an autographed copy of one of them that my mom had picked up somewhere. But it was just a part of that, the oral tradition and the written tradition. You had people like him. And look for him on Amazon. Anybody that's interesting, Bert Vincent,
Bert
columnist
Vincent.
for the Knoxville News Sentinel. And another person that kind of carried that on was, and I can't remember the guy's name now, Sam somebody, Handful of Thumbs and Two Left Feet is the name of his book. But
All
he
right.
wrote that column later, and kind of the same. And Bert had picked it up from, I think, Carson Brewer or somebody like that. But that opened a lot of tales. And of course, the Foxfire books. I think it's Foxfire
Oh yeah.
Volume 2 that
Foxfire.
has the Haints and witches and stuff in it. That was
Yep, it's on
always
my shelf right now. I'm looking right at
passed
it.
around. Yeah, love that one. And of course, Charles Edwin Price was from the South, and he
Mhm.
wrote a lot about little towns in particular: haunted Jonesboro, haunted Knoxville, haunted Nashville. And
Yes.
his canon of works, I think he's passed on now. But anybody
Yes,
that's
I believe so.
interested in Southern hauntings, things, his books will serve you well. And then, of course, was it 13 Alabama Ghosts and Jeffrey? I can't remember the lady's name, but she did Alabama, Georgia, I think Tennessee too. And Jeffrey was her resident ghost, but she wrote a lot of those tales out. And then, of course, in historic Jonesboro, Tennessee, you have to say that historic part. They're proud of that. They have the International Storytelling Convention in October. I've been there
Oh,
as
that's awesome.
in the audience, but I've never been there as a participant. But that is some fun to hear those stories come to life from good storytellers.
I bet. That sounds like a great place to go.
Now, we talked about the Bell Witch Cave. We're almost out of time here. But have you ever visited the Bell Witch Cave or the grounds there?
Yes, yes, I've been down to Adams, Tennessee a couple times. The first time that I went down, I actually wasn't able to go to the cave because there had been torrential downpours and the cave
Yep, the
floods.
Red River floods like you wouldn't believe
Mhm.
right there. But yeah,
Oh,
Chris
yeah.
Kirby, the owner, her and her husband own that. She's a friend of mine. And the first time that I went, uh, there was nobody there. We got like a personal tour, and
Mhm.
she's got photographs. Back then, this was in the early '90s. She had a couple of photo albums full of pictures that she had taken, and full of pictures that people had sent back of anomalous stuff down there. I
Mhm.
had my first digital camera, an old Kodak, had like half a megapixel, I think. But I got some weird pictures there too. But if anybody
Yeah,
has an interest in that at all, it's worth checking out, certainly.
absolutely. Yeah, when I was there, and actually got to go to the cave, it was a similar situation. I had to wait for more people to show up for them to do a tour, so I sat with Chris and talked with her for probably an hour or 2 hours before enough people showed up, and they're like, "Okay, now we can go into the cave."
Yeah.
Um,
Back then she had a couple little books that she sold. I bought those, and then it's before she had the gift shop. And we sat out there. There was like a gazebo or picnic table or something up there, and she showed me
mhm.
all these pictures, and then talked about all the stuff that people have taken that's come back.
Yeah. Yep, exactly, that's where you get into the cursed objects, the rocks and things, and even now what she does is she'll get, porcelain dolls and paint them up to look like zombies or
Yeah, I
something
love that.
grotesque and sell them, and, they're getting sent back now as well.
That way she can just sell them again. Kidding.
Yeah, that's
But,
exactly what she
she said
does.
a lot of times when they're not there and they lock the gate, she said you come back and there would be a rock or something with a note tied to it. Say, I took this out of the cave. I'm sorry. Please put it back. It was near this place or that place. And I
Mhm.
get it. There's a lot of places like that. Petrified Forest, other caves, Mammoth Cave. There's places where you just don't take stuff because you might take home more than you bargained with. The Troll Bridge outside of Portland, Oregon. I've heard some
Right.
weird stories about people that took troll dolls from there. You're supposed to leave them, not take them. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, Heather, we're almost out of time for this episode. Thank you for joining us here on Everything Out There. Any parting words for the audience?
Well, thanks for having me. I've loved being here. Parting words, man, just stay weird. Stay weird.
Better weird than plastic. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. And I'll leave links to the show notes where you can find Small Town Monsters. And again, Heather, thank you for joining us. Go ahead and sign off here. Once again, you've been listening to Everything Out There on the Clyde Lewis Ground Zero Radio Network. I'm Steve Stockton. I'll see you a little further on down the trail. Tell your animals I said hi. Good night, everybody.